Help me welcome Natalie Moore. She is a Christian wife and mother of two boys, Ryan and Garrison. She's also a licensed mental health counselor, and she has worked in this community of mental health for more than 15 years. She was blessed to work with and learn from some incredible therapists and colleagues in one company for about 13 years. And then in 2023, she opened a private practice called Living Well Therapy, and it's located in Lake City, Florida. Within 6 months of doing that, she, along with some of her very closest friends, founded a nonprofit organization called Living Hope. Welcome, Natalie. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Since you've had a lot of experience working in the mental health field, telling us a little bit about how you came to work in this area.
I would say it's a combination of probably some personal things that I had gone through, as well as I had worked at the court system for many years here locally and then in the domestic violence injunction courts. And then I had gone to work at the Office of Court Improvement in the Supreme Court in Tallahassee, and then for personal reasons had moved back to the area. And I'd always been curious about where we sent people to get help. We did tend to see the same people, sometimes recurrently, and wanted to really affect change. I'm a little nosy too, so I wanted to go see where they were going and where I was sending them. My job included connecting them with different programs and the Batterers Intervention Program and some others for high conflict divorced couples. I worked with Johnny Evans, who piloted that program, and he trained me to help people that really had difficulty communicating, and they had a child together and they were going back and forth to court. And then I ended up practicing and applying a lot of those skills. We would meet with the couples for 8 weeks, and it was amazing how they would be on better terms by the end of that short period of time. And even if one person didn't participate, the overall message seemed to make a huge difference. So I was just kind of in love with that when I practiced, and I thought, there's no way this is going to work. And it wasn't easy, but to apply that personally made a big difference in my own life. And then I really wanted to do more of those types of things. So whenever I do learn something or have gone through something, I have been very motivated to try to share it. And so I had struggled with also alcoholism for a long time and could not understand it. I kept trying to logically understand it. And in other areas, I was pretty successful, but it seemed to be at this part where I was unable to just leave it alone, and had a lot of well-meaning, loving family members and others very hurt by that and trying to help me. And anyway, I did go to a community support group, and I had already been working in some of the fields, like I said, with divorced couples and domestic violence and high conflict. And I'd grown up with some childhood stuff, trauma from parents that had a pretty scandalous divorce and some different family things growing up, and just really never had therapy or had much of an idea of how to process it. And I always kind of tried to figure it out and tried to understand it with logic. So I was trying to do the same thing with substance abuse and with alcohol, and it really wasn't making any sense. I could sometimes have fun and stop, and other times not, and it was just really overwhelming. And different problems were accumulating, and they weren't always when I was drinking. I'll be honest, it wasn't always when I was drinking. And I did believe in God, but that at the time was very separate from anything to do with how I lived my life. It was a lot of rules, and I always felt like I wasn't measuring up or wasn't following the rules very well. I wasn't very good at it, but I was trying, and I did believe always that God existed. I just didn't think that he was pleased with me, or I prayed for that to go away, and it didn't go away. I had people tell me, just pray about it, and it just didn't happen that way. But I got sober in a community support group probably after some therapy, and the therapist kept suggesting that I go to these meetings, and I said, I don't need to do that. That's definitely not going to work, but I'll show you, was kind of my attitude. And I went, and it did help me a lot. And it does have a spiritual basis that's rooted in biblical principles that I'll talk about later, but some spiritual principles from the Bible but they didn't call it that. They used different language, and that helped me tremendously to move away from my old ideas about religion and the way I had been raised. And so I went back to school to get my master's to try to help others, because I was very excited when I did, by the grace of God, have some sobriety. And I was just really compelled to be able to do more in terms of helping others than I could do with a bachelor's degree. I still worked at that same company, and I had learned a lot on site, just watching them work and working with them, and parenting programs. And substance abuse then became a big focus. And I did that for 7 years or so. And then kind of got burnt out with that. But I moved towards, as I finished the master's, more individual counseling and family counseling, and then some supervisory manager positions. And really felt led to work with survivors of domestic violence rather than just the batterers. So I worked with women and had individual counseling and specialized in trauma and domestic violence, and then also did some work with personality disorders. You know, there's just so much to learn, and I did love the field because you can never know all of it or even a fraction of it, and everyone's so different. So it was a job where I wouldn't get bored. My dad joked that I thought there was no paperwork, and I was looking for a job that was no paperwork, but that didn't happen. But I did find out that I wouldn't ever get bored, because I used to kind of master something after 4 or 5 years, and then you want to go to the next thing. But there's just no end to how many different ways that we all develop, and certain things are expressed, or that we might have difficulties. And it's also helpful personally, because I'm always talking about these things. It helps to be able to be more aware and apply different skills in my life. But the population that I worked with was mostly court-ordered clients, or people that were involved with Department of Children and Families, and extensively had worked with child abuse and neglect and trauma and domestic violence, as I said. And so it did lead to a desire to work with people who wanted to go to counseling. And so I did branch out and leave, and went to work with a colleague in Gainesville for a brief time. And she and I talked, and I, for the first time, was able to really integrate spirituality and faith into mental health and psychology, and found that it was not so oppositional or different. So now it's been more of a spiritual and mental health journey.
Yes, and I love that. From our conversations, that's definitely where we have a lot in common, working with people, not just the mental health part, but also their spiritual health. That's really the source of our mental health, is when we're in that right relationship with the Lord.
I would agree that's at the center of our being. We are complex beings. He made us to have mental, emotional, physical, sexual, other parts of our being that all have health as well. But we think about physical health so differently, and we get checkups, and we don't have the stigma around needing to constantly attend to and pay attention to that part of us. And our spirit is the core. I believe we're spiritual beings. And I really just didn't know about that for the longest time. I was trying to only look at thoughts, emotions, and behavior. And I do think that tremendous amounts of change for me and others can happen there, which is also biblical. It centers in the mind. So there is a good bit to those other parts, and I don't believe that we were meant to just have one and not the other. They're just very interwoven.
Right, very connected. I agree. Yeah, and I love that there seems to be, as you mentioned, there has been a lot of stigma attached with mental health, but I would think it seems better in recent years. It seems to be a lot more awareness around mental health. Would you agree?
Yes, I think there's more discussed than in the past, and certainly sometimes excessively so, though. There's a lot of focus on emotions, or sometimes the other direction, the other extreme, where I think we can exclude other parts, and either way is not really effective as much. I can overthink or stay too focused on my feelings, and I do understand there's some value in what people say from a spiritual standpoint, that feelings are fickle. They're not easy to, not good to be trusted with our driving force in our life and going off of emotions. And I think there's a lot of growth, and I still have a lot of growth to do with that because they are important. And a really good friend, pastor, I think he spoke at Uplift, talked about Eddie Taylor. His analogy for that is so good about emotions should be like in the baby seat in the back, securely fastened, and they're important, but they don't drive the car.
Yes,
And I
exactly.
just try to apply that. I think
Yeah.
it's such a great way to visualize that they are precious and they matter.
Mhm.
And those extremes of trying to ignore our emotions is very detrimental, but so is letting them be in the front. That's
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yes,
I've
I've
come to
heard that they
find.
don't need to have any access to the controls of the vehicle too. Like they shouldn't be turning any knobs, right? Yeah.
I just thought that was such a great way to describe it. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It's all related, and how when we take our thoughts captive, how much of a better impact our thoughts can have than on driving our emotions, which can drive our actions to make better actions and choices and things. And that's been a big part of my journey too. So I can understand where you're talking about the importance of that. And I love one thing you said, that whenever you've learned things personally and then you love to share it with others. And that idea of keeping that, if you could give our listeners some tips on how they can stay strong mentally.
say, language is so important, and what we call things. I'm finding more and more that they are really all the same. If you had talked to me a year ago, or gosh, 10 years ago, I would not have really believed that I would be saying some of the words that I'm using now. I was really quite dismissive of some of the platitudes or the things that you would say, like pray about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I was very hurt. And I met a lot of people. In fact, that's what I was really driven by at first, was to go and try to help people who had been hurt in the church or hurt by people of faith, telling them too quickly to
Mm-hmm.
go pray about it, or just need to get in the word more, and now I'm saying that those things are some of the things that I think are essential to maintaining or having resilience
Yes.
and having strong mental health. I also used to think that strong people didn't have so much hurt or pain. Really also learned what they meant when they said count it all joy, and I thought they were very insensitive and
Mm-hmm.
doing harm. I was not ready yet. I had not had enough revelation or enough relationship with God to really receive that and understand what they meant. And I was around a lot of people over the years that have been hurt by those types of things, just where they were in their understanding. So I think that relationships with others
Mm-hmm.
are critical, and connection, because they are further along still often with me than I am in their experience, or they've experienced things and they can share about it. And one of the things I learned helps a lot is when people are vulnerable and stop having such shame about talking about these things. And the more that we do that, the more we find out that we're not alone,
Yeah.
that it's not so something's wrong with us. I thought there was something wrong with me for a long time. And one of the things that I think that's very powerful is to hear other people's stories and share your story, because it reduces shame. And
Yes.
I've always been a fan of Brene Brown. My stepmother helped me to read her books at the beginning, and I was fascinated. She does a lot of research about shame. The way that it multiplies and just grows and consumes us is when we keep things secret or when they're hidden.
Right.
So I understand there is not much wisdom in sharing all of your dirty
Of course.
details with the public. My dad was always a proponent of keep it to
Mm-hmm.
the family,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's a balance in that. So having relationships
Mm-hmm.
for me has been one of the most important things that I could say for mental health and connectedness to others. We are hardwired for connection.
Yes.
I know a lot of different people say that. I think Brene says that a lot. And that we need, God designed us, I think, now to need
Absolutely.
each other and to help one another. So sharing your story, hearing other people share their stories, and being able to have people come alongside you and support
Yes.
and know you, so they know when something is off and they can really be of help. And I thought I could do church at home, and I did listen to podcasts, or podcasts are great, and also online church, especially with COVID. But I know that there is something that really is powerful about being with others.
Yeah.
And when you share experiences and you share what God's done in your life or how you've moved through that, sometimes in a very messy way, it reduces a lot of those myths that I'm supposed to have it all together. I'm supposed to be strong and in charge. And oftentimes people move too quickly. So I would say another thing that is important is to allow yourself time for me to
Yeah.
process things when we do experience trauma. I'm not talking about chronic mental illness like you're born with these biological things, but many people have had experiences through the free will of others or behavior of others that is not their fault, but they're very painful. And I've been able to have the honor to walk with some people and find out that there's so many that think that they have to keep that hidden and tucked away and move quickly. Hurry up and grieve. Hurry up and get over it
Yeah.
in order to be strong. And I just really don't believe that that strength necessarily, and it ends up, it doesn't disappear, as you know, it just builds and then it comes out in a messier way usually. So, or in relationships. So I think that having more of a checkup, more the way we monitor our physical health, that we are always aware and practicing different things with our mental health too, processing things when they happen rather than storing them for later, which is a very human response. And then I think that another very important thing, of course, is the relationship with God. And I do love what I was told about. That is really the core and the center of all of our relationships, or it should be going outward. So working on that relationship directly with God, and then also from there with others and
Right.
out toward others, and not one or the other.
Right.
I think those are important. Now, there's a lot of skills to reset the nervous system. There's lots and lots of tools on the internet now, and breathing exercises and things like that, that meditation is actually biblical too. I used to think, yeah. There's no way that's going to help. But the simple things do help.
Okay.
And they are cliche because they really are effective and they really are so simple. Sometimes just exercise and, preventative things that would help our physical health. They also make a huge difference in our mental health. So I think those would be the
That's
main
great.
things that
Those
I
are
would.
great. I'm just going to recap that. So, and you just add in if I miss something, but a recap would be, I think there was 4 big things, and they were that being connected, having relationships, being willing to share your story and hear others' stories. That was kind of all into one great tip there. And I know people have to have that feeling of safety to be able to share their story. So even like what you're referring with your dad, like of course not sharing with just anyone, but sharing with people that you really feel connected and safe with is so important. And then the second one I heard was about time, allowing yourself time to process and not to just, as I like to say, carry those hard things and emotions around in a backpack. They just weigh us down, but yet to give yourself that time and mental check-in to process through is very healthy. Being around people who are going to recognize that you need that was also a good idea. I love that. And then your relationship with God being the core of all of our relationships. Obviously, I believe that to be a very big part of it as well. And then the last one was that resetting of our nervous system. It is so true. Like I know for myself, just on a real simple note, if I'm having a day that's just kind of off, if I get outside and I walk, I start feeling better. Not to oversimplify, I don't mean to do that because there's real heavy trauma that a lot of people go through, as you and I both know from our clients we work with. But at the same time, when we can change our environment a little bit, get outside and have something physical, because it's all connected, our physical and emotional, all of those things are so connected, it does help us at least a little bit. I agree. And the breathing techniques, I heard you mention that, those are so good. And I used to think too, that's just so simple. We all breathe, but it's different when you do it intentionally and you really get that deep breathing as you're going. And it's definitely helpful. I love those tips. Those are great.
I would say, just to add one more thing about the renewing of the mind, that Romans 12 is the scripture that that I go to the most about. We really can transform our experience and our perspective, so much of our inner world, by renewing the mind. And even before I was one that had that experience and I was able to read the word, I still was a proponent in cognitive behavioral therapy of affirmations or the truth, which is always the truth. whether we label that as I did not for so many years. I just want to be honest that I think God can reveal himself to us in many different ways. And I was mostly confusing that with religion and spirituality. So those, he can work through anything. And music was one place that I felt was very helpful. So a lot of times they say to reset that nerve, you can hum a song. And I did not know how powerful when they said worship or praise him through the negative things or the difficult things. There is so much power in that. But I would have called that affirmations or manifesting or saying, speaking positive things over your life back in a few years ago. So wherever you are, language is so important in terms of mentally. I would just shut down and put the fortress up when people would say words that reminded me of church for a long time. So I don't want to do that or to oversimplify that. Just take a walk if you're depressed and it'll go
Right.
away. Um,
Yeah. Not at all.
there's
There's much more
definitely a
to it.
process.
Right.
Yes.
For sure. I agree 100%. And I agree with the renewing your mind because really that's right back also to that cognitive behavioral therapy we were talking about. Because when we take those thoughts captive, I believe that the truth starts to set us free, like you were mentioning, because then we replace it with the truth instead of like some random truth maybe that we maybe believe is true. But if you took it and really evaluated it, I've heard that to be another tool you can use looking at is it really true or is it my thoughts around it. So bringing your thoughts in alignment really help with that so much. I agree, renewing mind is completely at the top of the list for sure. And as you said, it's not at all meant to replace medication, trauma therapy. There's so many needs out there, and we're not at all trying to say that you could take a walk and it would heal all of that at all. It can just simply help to kind of set your day a little bit and maybe help you reach out for the help you really need at a deeper level. I agree.
Let's talk about how we should not be surprised, by trials when they come. And I just still think that I'm so often surprised, or I fall into that, oh, I hope this gets better, and that avoidance of pain, which is really that hole that I believe is a God hole that I was trying to fill for many years in different ways, not healthy ways. We have this deep instinct, these needs, and if we don't meet them, if they're not met in that way, then we're going to try to meet them some way. That's what happens with a lot of behaviors. But I think that the idea that we need to be in a state of nothing really that we're having to do, that we're healed and we're just joyous all the time is a facade. I mean,
Right.
it's not really the norm. And I think that losing some of those things and getting rid of some of those thoughts, as you said, that are not actually true. When you really look, it never says we're going to be happy all the time. And I would chase happy. And I realized that it's a byproduct of living in alignment with spiritual principles and connection with Him. Happiness is a byproduct a lot of the time, but it's not the goal. And when I started being saved, I found out they don't tell you this the first time you go, but then I started to go more and more and more to church and hear things like crushing and the sanctification process, and really what all goes into that is pain. And it's not a sign that I'm doing something wrong or God's mad at me or I need to change some drastic part of my behavior or run away or that God doesn't love me. That it's part of the journey and being Christian. And I really think there's a popular opinion that we should not be having these feelings that are very natural and God-given indicators that I'm able to now press into Him and grow. And growth hurts. I mean, for me, it's a crushing. That's a good word, of the ego and of the other things, so the spiritual growth can happen. And we can't have that without dying to self. I did not know what they meant, but now that it is painful. But if we don't ever talk about that, that myth continues to be passed around that,
Yeah.
oh, pray for Susie, she's having a hard time. I mean, we're all kind of having a hard time if we're growing.
Yeah.
If there's not something that's going on that you're never wrestling. I just didn't realize how I had gotten complacent.
Yeah.
And it was good enough and things were good enough, but it wasn't really, I was missing the depth of the intimacy that I could have with God that makes it more than worth it. A moment makes it so important. But when people would talk about those things, I would get so upset and angry and not want to go back there.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
when something disturbs us, they say the truth sets you free, but first it will tick you off.
It might get your
And
attention,
every
right?
time I'm usually mad first.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Mhm.
because there's something to it. There's something that he wants me to grow in. Learning to pray about what are you trying to teach me with this, or what's my part in this, has
Yeah.
opened up a lot.
That's a good way to see that. And I think it's like rather than avoiding something hard, it's really leaning into that to see what is that lesson or what is God trying to show me, or just knowing that He's going to hold me and walk me through it. Because I know we could both give stories where God has just been right there and held us in His palm as we walked through whatever it was. And here you and I are both working in this field, but we also have shared with each other. We still have to do the work. Like we also still have our own struggles, our own realities of things that we're working through and dealing with. So it's not like we arrive because you happen to be working in this field, or even, people that that are much older in their Christian walk. They would tell you the same thing. We don't really arrive. We
Some
don't really,
some will,
right. Some will. Some will.
but
That's true.
some share, and I thought I'm doing it wrong. I really did go to school, like you said, for that wrong reason. I'm going to get the answers, the answer key, and then I'll help everybody else too. But I want to figure out what is the secret to
Hmm.
being able to
Hmm.
just stay in this. But it really doesn't say that we're going to.
Right.
And I think what you also shared about having to do the work or apply it, it's easy for me to understand why people would rather not, because it isn't pleasant and it is not popular. I
No.
think there's that imposter syndrome that comes up, or sometimes thinking professionally, I
Hmm.
can't say all that. The clients, I mean, obviously we don't talk about my
Yeah.
stuff in our
Right.
session, but they'll never come if I tell them about all of these things going on or that I've
Hmm.
done. So I understand why people don't advertise
Hmm.
some of the things that they walk through, but I think it is important to have someone around you who does. And if you don't find some community, some place to be able to have that, I think that really helped me, because when I couldn't believe and I couldn't really love myself, I needed to be around people that did and that
Yes.
could
Yes.
tell me that it's actually happened for them. It wasn't something I could argue with,
Mhm.
because I'm a good debater. And I would kind of poke holes in any kind of advice people would try to give me. But when
Mhm.
they were telling me their story, you can't really do that. So, other
Mhm.
professionals, that I see lots of people in ministry or extremely successful business people, and there is such shame attached to this whole idea of having to come talk to somebody. And I'm hoping that we're continuing to move away from that. I think the younger people are much more comfortable with talking about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you and I offer different things to the community that would be an opportunity for people to come into a group setting and be able to hear stories and share their story. And we're going to put all of that in our show notes for people that they can reach out if they want to reach out to Natalie or to myself and be a part of some of the things that we're offering that help you have a safe place that you can come and share either one on one, right? Because we both offer one on one, but also a group session, which is great opportunity for people. As you've mentioned a little earlier, that idea of resilience, I think being around other people who are a little bit ahead of us on a journey, maybe a trial or trauma they've gone through, it really does help us. It gives us some hope, that we can also work through whatever it is that we're working through. And, I think that's a really helpful tool to have in your tool bag. It was one of your first things you mentioned about having a connection to people. So it's real important. And then the idea of being resilient, and you've mentioned it a couple of different ways, but when we allow ourselves to feel those hard emotions or not avoid the hard things, whatever it might be for each of us, that is when we become more resilient. Would you agree?
Yes, and there's no way to grow without that resistance or that adversity. I heard an analogy lately that about weightlifting. If you bench press the bar your whole life, you aren't going to continue to develop muscle. Maybe you do for a little while, but then eventually you won't be building anything stronger. So, in terms of that, there has to be more weight added. And then it is important not to have too much at once and have somebody, to spot you. If it's just things like that, like they help me picture what this is like in the spiritual realm or the mental health and emotional realm. It's also extremely powerful to help other people. I know much of what I've learned, it was in a pursuit to try to help a client, that I would research things or that I would really press in to pray or seek an answer to be of help. And then I would find things I needed to be doing or hearing or saying to myself, or, I mean, gosh, it's really easy to tell everybody else the right things and to encourage them, but it's difficult to do that yourself.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
I do think a therapist should always have gone to therapy at least at some point and know what it's like to be on the other side. If they're not in clinical therapy, some kind of mentor or coach or something that they've done where they've also been vulnerable and helped. But people are driven to help others, and that really can be a powerful way to deal with your own stuff. And the idea that I need to be all better before I have anything to share is another one of those lies.
That's true.
It's really not true. You do not have to be arrived to
Mm-mm.
do this work.
Right.
In fact, you can kind of hide from your stuff if you want to, because there's always people that have it worse. So if you
Mhm.
compare like that, or if you think like, oh, I'm okay, I'm not nearly struggling this much. I could be, and we're going to miss our own personal growth and
Right.
our own opportunities to really go to the next level. And I really did find life to be kind of pointless, before, and understanding that those things that you're talking about, we want to be loving, and I did patient, and we cannot have those things without the painful experiences or the adversity or the trials. I mean, you can't have a whole lot of faith if you never encounter anything other than your way. I can think I'm pretty spiritually fit until something doesn't go my way, and then we see what's in there.
That's right. It starts
So
to kind of spill out, right? And I think this also connects back to the idea about the psychology world, the mental health world, and the spiritual world. They're not as separate as most people would like for them to be. They're very connected. I remember when I first started studying psychology way back in college, it did bother me, some of the things that would come up. So I would question those things. But the idea of those being joined, I mean, God created our mental capacity. He gives us that. And He also is all about helping us to be sanctification. But as you said, that comes through some trials, sometimes really painful experiences for people. They get to the other side of them, and then they have some of that resilience and some strength, and they may get a little rest for a while from some of those trials, but then it seems like there will be something else that comes along that is going to grow them a little bit deeper.
and I don't mean he sends all of the things. Some of it's
Yeah.
just free will and being in this place
This fallen
temporarily.
world. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I think he allows certain things
Allows.
for us to be able to grow in relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
So when I really had become aware in those, and like I said, I'm still a baby. I still have so much to learn. It's not going to make sense. It's not logical. And I kept trying to figure it out like with my logical mind.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't possibly understand. They say calculus when we're kindergartners, so if we could think with the omniscient mind of God, then we would be more than human. We don't have but a limited finite understanding, and we have to trust. So I think analysis is good, but they would always tell me that I was overly analytical. I thought it was a compliment. Like I thought they were complimenting me because I thought that's good to be analytical. They said no. When it comes to spiritual things, analysis is paralysis. So you can
Mm-hmm.
overthink stuff and really be hurting. I was hurting myself, I think, a lot more with the way that I was trying to understand God in that mentally logical way. There is no, if you're good things happen. All those questions about why do bad things happen to good people. It just didn't make sense in
Yeah.
that kind of a way. But as far as support and different kinds of services you were talking about, I was thinking about how some people will never go to church like me, and they will not be doing that, and some people will never go to therapy. There's a lot of stigma about both, and
Yeah.
in the mental health world there's a lot of stigma about faith. And
Mm-hmm.
I used to think that wasn't real therapy. And it's different than clinical services, certainly, but there's oftentimes huge impact that can happen from support groups and non-clinical types of services, and have a lot of respect for what you do. And those groups that combined the American Bible Society, and the Trauma Healing Institute have really opened my eyes to see how much stuff people carry that they don't realize they're carrying because they're functioning well. And they would not need to be in therapy doing deep clinical work. They're functioning, and their insurance wouldn't pay for it because they don't have things that are hindering their ability to do what they need to do, but they still have a lot of pain that hadn't been healed. And that's combined with the Trauma Healing Institute and the psychology stuff. And so that has been awesome to see. There were some women that were in their 70s and 80s talking about things they said for the first time. They had a great group and trust together at a church, but they also were able to match up these words with the biblical things and understand the vocabulary was different, but it wasn't really against what they believed. And so I just think we can all benefit so much when we're open minded. And I try to continue to know that I don't know all the stuff.
We probably wouldn't want to be able to know all the stuff. It would probably be too heavy, right?
Oh yes, I'm glad he only gives me a little bit at a time. If you told me before, I said no, I'm not going to do this. Like this last year with the nonprofit, there's been a lot to learn, and a very kind friend helped us to get started, but I really had no idea how much there was to that, or private practice, or I probably wouldn't have done it. God knows what we need, that's for
He
sure.
does. He does. And he always goes before and provides it. And he just helps us to be obedient and take that next step into whatever he leads us into doing. And I see you doing that. I love some of the things that I see and know that you're doing, and appreciate your work in the community very much. So we're going to put all this in the show notes so you can reach out to Natalie. But is there any one last thing you want to share before we wrap up today?
I guess in terms of what can people do besides going to traditional therapy, which is expensive, or they may not have some pressing issue that's impacting their ability to sleep or eat or work, take care of their responsibilities, you're not able to access individual therapy or not wanting to, there are different things that you can do to be connected that do help others. Living Hope's purpose was to help bridge the churches and the mental health community and organizations, that we have so many resources that I didn't know about. So to help others, a lot of people listening may be in the helping professions or in healthcare, or have friends in their church and they want to know where can they go, what can they do, or how can I be involved. So it would be a place that they can volunteer or become members, or the church could become members. And we have trainings that we offer to members, like mental health first aid, and being able to recognize when is it appropriate for a professional therapist type situation, when is it really just I can keep this between us. And then we have those trauma groups that we are doing. We have a couple of dates set aside, and then people could register to attend a healing group that's 6 weeks long, and it is biblically based. We also have a lot of different things with the youth. We have an after school thing that we're doing right now at LCMS, and then we have community youth events where they speak and share their story, and they come up with the music and the games, and students from different schools and churches get together and they talk about faith and then some of the things that they've walked through, so people could be involved in helping. Or if they have a young person, a student that's under 25, they could be on the youth council, and they advise us and tell me what to do, what to go by, what topics they want to talk about. And they had one about shame not long ago, and it was so good. Some of the things that they are carrying are profound. So as a parent of a 13-year-old, and really I got into that because I looked through his phone every now and then just to monitor, and there was some things going on with one of the young girls. She messaged him about wanting to hurt herself and having a bad breakup. And so he wasn't personally going through anything, but I went to talk to the school, and the principal was amazing. Miss Lee allowed us to, that's where we really started this thing called Vessels after school. And we did that for a little while, kind of a mentoring in a group setting and talking about how to provide, practical ways to apply their faith. They prayed with one another. They also had lost that young girl around that time at that school, and she was friends with many of them who were struggling. Not that they personally had a diagnosis, but their students were sharing about how traumatic it was to lose a classmate, a friend, and just came to find that in any of these places, to be able to talk about mental health, spiritual health, to have more training and cross training
Yes.
for
Yes.
us, and being able to help, not being so fearful that we might differ in theology. We have a lot more in common than we do
Right.
separate. So just basic Christian principles that we can't really carry out making disciples if we don't have connection with others and talk about those things, and we can't really stay mentally healthy if we don't have conversations about those things and give the students a place. So we do have that, and we also have several different things that we've been honored to be able to do with that nonprofit. We had to officially form so that we could apply for grants, and then we have Helene affected the community. So we have another contract and grant to provide services to Hamilton, Swanee, Lafayette, and Columbia. So our Live and Hope staff are out in the community providing a lot of education in the schools and in the community organizations about mental health, coping skills, practical things that you can do, because it is a trauma when we have a hurricane. I didn't think those two things went together, and we're also able to talk about faith and pray with them. It's the first organization that's faith-based that's had one of those opportunities. And anyone can walk up without having to fill out paperwork, without having to keep any confidential information. We're not doing clinical services. We could connect them to those if they don't know where those are. But we also really want to highlight the work that so many people like yourself are doing in the community that we don't know about, even though it's a small town and rural communities. I was amazed at 15 years of working in the field, how much I did not know, and how these resources, even though they were small, we didn't know about one another, and that can take so much time to navigate. So we have a great project manager, Pastor Dale Tompkins
Yes.
has been the project manager, and he also developed a database to put all of that into so people could search if they were looking for different services and different providers, and find that, as well as the things being offered in the community. If they've been impacted by Helene, we have no charge support services and groups online and in person
It's
in the
wonderful.
churches. So if you want to be trained and learn how to do those things for others in your communities, or if you want to receive those services, we have those going on also on that website. So yeah, it's exciting what God can do. Just get out of the way, and sometimes there's some crushing or some waiting and learning how to depend on Him daily and not know what's going to happen. But that trauma resilience and relationships and resources are the big things that we all need.
Agree. I agree. Well, this has been wonderful to chat today. I appreciate you being on here so much, Natalie. And I will make sure in the show notes people can reach out to you if they would like to connect or want to get trained, even like you said, if they need the services or they'd like to be trained to help. You have both options there. I appreciate that so much. You're doing a great job in our community.
Thank you so much. It's just an honor to work with people like you. And if there's anything I can do to follow up, just let me know.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.